So that, girl, I wanna know about you. So that, girl, I wanna know about you.
The man is the backbone of the family and the household, but women don't realize how much of an influence that they have in their family.
Absolutely.
And how much they can actually positively or negatively influence their marriage.
So this sounds like expectations on women's part. In other words, what expectations do they have before they consider marriage, think about marriage, or either get married?
Well, I can speak from my own experience. The very first thing that I had to do was to accept my husband for who he is and stop trying to change him to be something that I thought he needed to be. That was step number one. Because once I realized that he accepted me as I was, with all of my flaws, all of my failures and insufficiencies, I realized that I was placing too high of an expectation on him. So I needed to accept him as he is, instead of,
ladies, from a female perspective.
Instead of capitalizing on all of the negative things that I saw in him, I had to begin to look at the positive. I realized, and I can say this from my experience, this is my experience, the 99.9% of the problems that we had in our marriage was me. When 99.9% of the time, I thought it was him. And it was in my perspective, because if you have a glass that's half full, you can look at it and see if it's half full or is it half empty. It depends on your attitude and how you look at a situation. So for years, I capitalized on negative things that I saw in him. And we have to realize every human being walking on the face of the earth has negative qualities as well as positive qualities.
This is true.
And it is up to us to decide what we're going to focus on. So for so many years, I focused on the negative aspect. And my husband and I had separated 3 times. We were headed for divorce twice.
Really?
And I loved him. In spite of all of the problems that we had, we loved each other, but I couldn't understand what the problem was. Until about the 3rd time that we were headed for divorce, I had to look in the mirror. I had to be honest with myself. I had to look at myself and say, what am I doing wrong? What can I do to change? Because I focused on him. If he would do this, or if he would do that, or, then everything would be fine. In my mind, all of the problems that we had was his fault, and all his fault alone.
Right.
And that is how I saw it for a long time.
Right. And speaking of behavior, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, 42% of black households are ran by single women. And, this is something that we as a culture, just women period, but specifically black women, that I think that we tend to shy away from. And do you have an opinion about why black women are the least likely to get married compared to our white sisters?
I could be wrong.
Your opinion is always welcome.
It might, I could be wrong, but it seems to me that black women are least likely to want to submit to a man, because black women are independent. We've been raised by independent black women that have, a lot of times, raised by a single mom who was strong and independent, taught their daughters to be strong and independent. And I think it's more difficult for black women to give up some of that independence and to submit to a man in the way in which a man desires for a woman to submit to them. But the thing about it is what we don't understand sometimes about submitting to a man is that when you submit to your husband, that does not necessarily mean that you lose your identity.
Absolutely.
And, you know, you do have to have a man that's worth submitting to.
Right.
You do have to be, you know, have someone that you can follow, because when, you know, you can't follow anybody.
Right.
And it just kind of depends on a case-by-case basis.
Right. And in case the audience, you know, don't know, I am familiar with Cathy, and we have had this particular conversation in the past on social media. And when I myself mentioned the word submissive, you know, the sisters seem to, like, you know, have, like, you know, start raising their torches. So the word submissive does not have to be a negative connotation to use, or expression to be used within your relationship also. You know, so I'm glad that you happen to have mentioned that word submissive to, you know, and expound on it, because we, you know, black women, we tend to be very independent, have that independent attitude, behavior, but we also have difficulty in, it seems, allowing men to love us the way we deserve to be loved and should be loved.
And I think, you know, sometimes fear is a factor, because when you allow someone to be the leader and you submit to them, in a sense, you're placing your life in their hands. Yes. To a certain degree of control.
Yes.
And I understand how difficult it can be to submit to a man, because I had difficulty submitting to my husband for a period of time. But I began to realize that men have what they call the male ego. That is something that they have.
Don't we know this?
That they're, you know, they can't just give that up. To give that up would make them as less than a man in their eyes.
Right, right.
And so when we are willing to allow our husbands to be the leader,
okay,
and that is a form of submission, and that kind of strokes their male ego.
Okay.
Because men are naturally born to be leaders and, you know, want to protect and be in charge. And yes, some men do go overboard. But that's just something that I believe is innately grown in a man. You know, just like women are creatures of emotions and we're more emotional, more
right,
sensitive.
Right.
That's just, you know, our emotional makeup. And as for a man, that's a part of his innate, you know, makeup.
So it would pretty, you know, maybe a starting place for us to begin is to stop shaking the finger and shaking the head, you know, and the, you know, hip thing, right?
Exactly, because
it sends a message, ladies. It really does.
It really does. You can get your point across without, you know, breaking your neck and doing the duck, and
right.
you know, and you know, you can do all of that without being so dramatic. Because I realized that a lot of times the problem in my marriage was not what I said to my husband. It's the way I said it to him. Because you can, there were times that I would say things to him that would be belittling to him, or make him feel like I considered him as less than a human being.
Right.
And, you know, and I realized that when I began to speak to him with respect and say what I have to say in the right way, then he became more susceptible to listening to what I had to say, instead of just tuning me out.
Right.
And I'm talking to the wall.
Right.
Because that's just, you know, infuriates women even more, because women hate to be ignored.
Right.
I know from experience. So
you know, so slowing that roll and you know, be willing to slow down and listen helps also.
Exactly, because that also, men also see that as a form of submission.
Absolutely.
Because you know, submission and respect are twin brothers. So when you know, extend the same respect that you want to be extended to you, a lot of times you get what you give. And women, you know, we are more emotional. A lot of times, you know, things upset us sometimes that may not necessarily upset a man, and sometimes we don't understand, and we might look at that as a sign that he doesn't care. But my husband is the most nonchalant person on the planet.
Okay.
The house could be on fire, and he'd probably say, okay, the house is on fire, y'all, let's leave. And I'm screaming to the top of my lungs. This actually happened. Our house actually did catch on fire one time, and he was saying, you know, okay, there's a fire, y'all get out the house, and I'm screaming. And he goes and calmly puts out the fire. It wasn't a big fire, but, you know, in my eyes, it was big. But that's just his personality. He's very laid back, relaxed, nonchalant, and I used to look at that as he didn't care. Because just because I'm screaming to the top of my lungs and I'm running around the house like a madman, that doesn't mean I care more than he cares.
Right.
So I had to realize that I needed to look in the mirror. I needed to examine myself.
Okay.
Because after having 4 children, you know, I didn't want to get a divorce. But it just seemed inevitable. But that was only until I got to the end of my rope, and I was forced to look in the mirror and say, what am I doing wrong?